When I choose pigments for my clients, I choose only the most beautiful shades.
Shade is definitely an important characteristic of a pigment, but it is not the most important one. Since we are talking about the products that is applied into a human body, other characteristics have to play a big role in the selection. Before we start talking about the characteristics, we will first mention the 4 most important groups of people who give their opinion about the pigments. The first group are end users, that is consumers. Then we have professional artists, and after them, doctors and scientists. While the end users are mostly interested in the shade of the pigment, artists choose pigments according to their price and technical characteristics such as drying of the pigment during the work, retention, shelf life, packaging and so on. Doctors and scientists are not interested in the shade or the price, and probably not in a single technical characteristic as well. They are interested in the composition and the allergic potential of all components. Unlike doctors, scientists perform tests and determine the long-term effect of pigments on the entire organism. Thanks to them, today we know that pigment is actually not only applied into skin, but it ends up in the bloodstream, lymph nodes, kidneys and liver too. From all this, we can conclude that no artist can say which pigment is the best one. Artists can only give their opinion on a small number of technical characteristics of a pigment. Can doctors or scientists say which pigment is the best? Definitely not. All opinions together are important in order to create the best pigment. However, since artists are only buyers of pigments, brands and factories usually fulfill only a small part of technical characteristics to be competitive on the market with a low price. Additionally, the problem is that in most of the world there is no regulation that controls the production of the tutte and PMU pigments.
For me, the best pigment is the one that I can put into the skin easily.
The easiness of applying the pigment is very important. If the pigment is difficult to apply into the skin, the artist will need a long time to work and the skin can be easily damaged. This is probably one of the favorite characteristics of all artists. However, that we need to know is that impurities in pigments are one of the reasons why they are easy to apply. The size of the pigment particles itself is important, but with the addition of binders, the pigment binds to the fillers, that is impurities, and the result is an easy application. The needle and the application tool are also responsible for this characteristic of the pigment as well as the skin itself. Expensive and pure pigments will never win in this performance, but they will certainly win in other much more important performances.
I just love this pigment. It has insane retention.
We will often hear this description of a pigment, although this is not just a characteristic of the pigment itself. Retention depends on skin quality, pigment application quality, post-treatment care, and so on. For example, inexperienced artists will have poor pigment retention no matter what pigment they use, while more experienced artists have better and better pigment retention results over time. In order to artists to be able to give their opinion on 2 pigments on the skin, they will have to use 2 different brands with exactly the same shades, which is very rarely possible. We came to the conclusion that if artists have not used two different brands with different compositions and the same shades on the same skin, that is on the same clients, with exactly the same tool and same pressure on the skin, they cannot conclude if a pigment has better or worse retention. No matter how often you hear that this attitude from artists, the fact is that more than 98% of artists have not performed this kind of test.
What I like most about my pigment is that it dries over time and gets thicker and thicker.
This characteristic is actually a characteristic of technologically primitive colors. That is a mixture that have not been developed enough. The pigment that dries quickly in the air contains compounds that evaporate easily, and they are mostly harmful to the skin. In addition, evaporation increases the density of pigments over time, so the same pigment will be unevenly applied into the skin, which can result in different shades after healing.
I hate small packages. When I shop, I buy a huge package so that I can have it for a long time. And it's also cheaper for me.
Every package from which you can squeeze the pigment several times means that the products inside must contain preservatives that will preserve the products after opening. Theoretically, it will be ideal if there was a monodose, that is a single-use package that is sterile and does not contain preservatives. However, it is very difficult to determine the amount of pigment in a monodose, and it is made even more difficult because artists mix pigments to create new shades. Still, small packages means less contact with the packaging itself and, of course, a lower risk of pigment contamination. Smaller packaging provides safer pigments for the client.
I've seen that many artists use this pigment and they are all super happy with it.
As I have already explained, artists are not the only group of people who need to give their opinion about the pigment, because they can only describe the technical characteristics that are less important than the purity of the pigment and safety for use on clients.
My wonderful pigment is made in the USA.
Even though the USA is the world's leading economy, whose products are known by their quality, the situation is completely reversed when it comes to tattoo, PMU and microblading pigments. The USA has no regulation for these products, so it mainly produces pigments of the same quality that can be found in China. Made in USA pigments in test very often show a large amount of heavy metals and carcinogenic aromatic amines. Made in USA is definitely not something that an artist familiar with the pigments would be brag about.
I use only branded pigments.
Each pigment factory has its own brand, but each brand does not have its own factory where pigments are produced. The number of brands on the market is huge and much larger than the number of factories. If a brand is produced in a factory under strictly controlled conditions, that is totally okay. However, a huge majority of brands buy large packages of the pigment from China and repackage them at home. The brand of the products that is applied into the body is completely irrelevant in relation to chemical correctness and safety. Pigments are not clothing, food or technology for the brand to play the vital role.
My pigment lasts 5 years, so it's definitely of a high quality.
The lifetime of pigments before and after opening are two different things. If you have a pigment that can last a long time after opening, you probably have a pigments that contains a large amount of preservatives, which are generally very harmful for the skin, but also for the entire organism.
When I hear how much some artists pay for the pigment, I'm shocked. I can't help, but I think they are so stupid. I can tell you the secret where I buy my pigments: 5 times cheaper.
Unlike fashion, where brand and the marketing make up the biggest part of the price, with the pigments, the production process and purity play the biggest role. It is similar to diamonds. Diamonds can be a part of the brand's jewelry, but their purity has nothing to do with the brand. The brand will not make them cleaner. The higher the purity, the more expensive the pigment.
My pigment is made in accordance with all the regulation. I know, they told me, and I saw it on their website.
If your brand claims that the product complies with a certain regulation, then we should pay attention to what exactly these claims refer to. Most of them say that the product is made from approved raw materials, but that is not important. During the production of the pigments, the creation of cancerogenic formaldehyde may happen, which, for example, were not present at all in the raw materials. During the grindings of the pigments, heavy metals may appear that were not present in the raw material at all. The final products, that is the mixture, must be negative for all dangerous substances, not the raw material. Make a distinction when reading claims about complying with regulations. Raw materials and the end products are not the same, and many companies use the trick of approved raw materials to promote compliance with regulations.
How did I find this brand? Well, I just Googled top PMU pigments and I found the list of the best ones. My pigment was in the first place.
Charts that you will find on Google are more often written by copywriters and salespeople than professionals. If you find a link under each product where you can buy the products, you can be almost sure that the chart was created to increase the sales of those products. For such text and charts, marketing agencies are paid to sell specific products and not to research all products and display the top 5 or top 10 products. Such charts are completely irrelevant and should not be a source of information for professionals when making their choices. If you ask ChatGPT and Google same question, you will get completely different answer because ChatGPT, unlike Google, is not optimized to make paid sales.
It drives me crazy when I heard that pigments can cause cancer. I've been in this business for 10 years. I've never heard of anyone getting cancer from a tattoo or permanent makeup.
Thank God that I have not heard of such a case either, but I'm particularly concerned about this topic. The website Medipub provides thousands of scientific papers and research in which scientists alert the community to the high level of cancerogenic ingredients that can be found in tattoo, permanent makeup and microblading pigments. Tests are being carried out all the time, the conclusion of which lead to an appeal to focus much more attention on the long-term effects of the pigments on the entire organism. Remember, when scientists linked paraben with cancer, paraben disappeared overnight. The more recent case with the baby powder also had a similar course. In 1893, a large company started selling baby powder that was later linked to controversies that it contained carcinogenic asbestos. It took tens and tens of years to establish the link between cancer and these products, And today, this company is facing over 20,000 lawsuits from people who claim that they got cancer from these products. Let us pure and verified pigments and preserve the health of our clients as well as our careers. Because when we hear that someone got cancer because of pigments, that will be the end of all our careers.